In the previous episode we put the casters on. In this episode I'm going to build up the shelves and place the top on the workbench. I clamped the base of the shelf at both sides just to make sure it wouldn't slide while screwing it in. On hindsight this was probably a bit of overkill, but done no harm. I then used size 4 25mm screws to attach the board. Although these screws are self-drilling, I still made pilot holes just to make it easier putting them in. I then measured the side of the shelf. I marked the width of the shelf out on the plywood for cutting. I didn't bother with the length as I could mark this once I held it up to the workbench. Just a wee double check here. Measure twice, cut once. I set the blade of my circular saw to the depth of the wood. Then cut the board. With the board in place, it's just a matter of marking the height you want to cut it and then giving it a cut. Perfect. Lovely job. Once the sideboards were all cut, I screwed them into place. I used the level on my phone to make sure the screws were aligned on the opposite side. The two middle boards needed stop blocks to rest against. The screws were just the tiniest bit long, so I snipped a bit from the top. For the end shelves, I decided to make my own wee stop blocks. I cut these about 1 inch thick. The alarm you hear is telling me that my 5 minutes are up for today. Next day I cut my shelf. Okay, that's the battery flat. I repeated this process for the rest of the shelves. Rather than measure the distance between the shelves, I put a mark on a stick and used this to make sure that they were all the same. Now for the shelves on the inside. I cut a piece of wood to the height I wanted the shelf and marked all around so that it'd be even. I then fixed stop blocks to rest the shelves on against this line. My camera ran out of battery shortly after this, but all you're missing is me cutting out the plywood and setting it in as a shelf. So all that remains to do now is cut the 2x4s that will be used for the worktop and glue and screw them in place. While I'm putting the top on, I'll tell you a bit about my experience of ME. From my teams I was very active. I ran marathons, mountain marathons, swim-a-thons. I was a sub-aqua instructor. Loved my motorbike. I took off every summer for a biking trip, even went as far as Berlin and back once. There wasn't a night I wasn't doing something. I would even stop on the way home from work to run up and down the mountain just to keep my legs fit. Then about 5 years ago I hurt my back. It was so severe it required spinal surgery, which wasn't overly successful, but that's another story. Shortly after the operation, I began feeling strange. There were days I just had no energy at all. I assumed this was just part of the recovery process and kept doing post-op physio and eventually returned to full-time work. I never felt my old self though and never got my full fitness back. I went from 8-hour walks in the mountains to just 30-minute walks along streets. After about 6 months back at work, I realised something was very wrong. As by lunchtime I was exhausted, and by the time I got back home, all I was fit for was to climb into bed. This went on for a couple of weeks, with my condition worsening all the time until I eventually asked if I could have reduced hours. My work was very understanding and reduced me down to 6 hours per day. However, I still kept deteriorating until I was working just 4 hours a day, 2 of those days working from home. I kept this up for as long as I could, however I knew it couldn't last as everything I had was putting into work, and the rest of the time was spent in bed desperately trying to get enough energy for the next day's work. Eventually the inevitable happened and my boss called me in for a chat. I must say he was brilliant. He told me to take myself off and concentrate on getting better, and my job is being kept for me no matter how long it takes me to recover. However, this wasn't the end of it. Even without the pressure of work, I was still deteriorating and fast. Within 2 months, I became totally bedbound and experienced the strangest mix of symptoms any illness could fathom. Every part of my body was affected. I had aches and pains all over my body, mainly in the muscles and joints. For about 2 weeks, I would do nothing but sleep, often sleeping for 17 plus hours a day. Then for about 2 weeks, I would experience awful insomnia, for I could only get about 2 to 3 hours sleep a day. I would get strange headaches accompanied by a pressure on the skull, best described as a balloon, slowly inflating inside my head throughout the day. I became intolerant to light and noise and would have to lie in a darkened room with a face mask on and noise-cancelling earphones. If I sat or stood up, I'd always get dizzy, and curiously always fell to the right. My eyesight would get blurry, my arms and legs would go heavy, and I could hardly lift or move them. My memory got really bad, and I would start doing silly things like going for a cup of tea and returning to my room with just a tea bag. No cup, no water, just a tea bag. This was made all the worse as the trip to the kitchen would have sapped the day's energy and a return trip was out of the question. Probably the silliest thing I done was put my iPad into the dishwasher by mistake. Brain fog would set in, where you struggle to think of words. My concentration went completely, and I stopped watching TV or reading books as anything over 5 or 10 minutes was just too much to take in. Likewise, conversations were very hard to complete. After months of going to the doctor for tests and examinations, I was eventually diagnosed as having ME. This was bittersweet, as it was great to know what was wrong with me, but I was also told there was nothing they could do about it. ME is a much misunderstood illness, which has only in recent days been acknowledged and researched. More money apparently is being spent researching male pattern baldness than researching ME. I asked if there were any specialists they could refer me to, but the reply was that there are none in the UK. All the GP could do was prescribe drugs that eased the symptoms. I joined the ME Association for Northern Ireland and signed up to as many ME forums as I could find online to try and learn as much as I could about the illness. That was 1.5 years ago, and it's that complex a subject I'm still learning. I then lost my independence. I became unable to look after myself. Cooking, cleaning and housework was no longer possible, and I was surviving on liquid meals. My parents collected me and took me back to live with them. That was just over 1 year ago, and I'm still there. I'm sure I would have been hospitalised long ago if it hadn't been for their care. My dad took on the quest for information and discovered several other people from my hometown had the same thing. Although none of them would say they were quite back to their old selves, each one of them made enough of a recovery to return back to some sort of normality and work. Each one had seen the same specialist just 20 miles away from where I was living. One of them was even a good friend of mine from primary school days. I contacted this specialist and he ran all kinds of tests on me. When the results came back, he informed me that I had high levels of several metals in my tissues, was low in the number of vitamins and minerals, and had high levels of candida in my gut. Our quest was to regulate all that through diet, supplements and drugs to help the body recover. Before we started that though, I had all 11 mercury fillings removed and replaced with the white ones. I stuck to the treatment regimentally for almost a year now, and to be honest, haven't seen a big improvement. First thing to tell you on all the forums is that what works for one person won't necessarily work for another. I firmly believe that the slight improvement I do see is from the care my parents are giving me, allowing me to rest when required to recover naturally. On my good days, I allow myself 5 to 10 minutes activity, should that be a quick walk or building the likes of this workbench. As soon as that time's up, I return straight to bed. If I overdo it, it can take me 4 to 5 days pure bed rest to get over it. It is for this reason that ME sufferers are referred to as the millions missings. It's also the reason that when you do see us, we look alright, because you only see us on our good days. I consider myself quite fortunate, as there are many ME sufferers worse off than me. Some have never managed to get out of their beds for years, and some even have to be fed through tubes. With this channel, I hope first and foremost to entertain people. Secondly, hopefully some people will find the how-tos useful. But also, I'm hoping to raise awareness of this awful illness by sliding a wee bit of info into the odd video here and there. It takes me a long time to complete projects, so don't be expecting videos every day or even weeks. This Workbench series took me 4 months to complete, and it should really only be a 2-day build. Okay, so apologies, I had a few camera difficulties there. First of all, the battery went, managed to get that charged up, brought her back out, and the memory card was full. So as a result, I only have half-hour slots to work on this before the ME kicks in and I get exhausted. So I tore on with most of them. I left one of these top panels to put on, and I'll show you how to do that now. So plenty of glue. Try and get all the surfaces. You just spread that around so as much of it's covered as possible. Just work like there. A bit more. Obviously, the more surfaces got this here, the more stick there's going to be, more contact. If you put it on too thick, the wood tends to just slide about. And don't worry about it dripping over the edges, because I can pull that off later. And this is the edge that's going to butt up against the other piece of wood. Out of the way. That should catch all right. What I'm going to do is put a few clamps on just to make sure it doesn't move. Put it in as tight as I can as well. What that's done is raised it up, which I don't want. Now I drill my holes, pilot holes. Now what I'm going to do, put a bigger drill bit in for countersinking. You don't want that to go down too deep. Take your time, be careful with it. Job done. For the keener eyes amongst you, you'll realise that there's a few screws missing. I've run out of screws, but I'll get some more and I'll pop them into the holes that are missing, and that'll be job done. So now just all I have to do is clean up the excess glue. Shouldn't need these anymore. Just take the wee damp off. Finish her off. If there's any residual glue left there, you can get that with the sander there. Job done. Just in time. Okay, so finished piece. Do your work round. Almost like it was made to measure. If you enjoyed this series on how to build a workbench, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you'll be notified of any further videos when they arrive.